I'm here with Trip Jennings, director of Elemental. Um, I guess one thing I always want to ask directors of something like this is like kind of what's your sort of take on the truth of like documentary type filmmaking?
The truth of documentary, like the truthiness. Is it? What do you mean?
Yeah. Well, like so. When you do a documentary, obviously, like every edit's a lie, that sort of thing. But
Sure,
you can find truth within that. What do you suppose the as a filmmaker? What do you suppose
sure.
that I can't even think of
Like how close are we getting?
what's your responsibility as far as being a filmmaker?
Sure, yeah. Well, I'll say. I mean, okay. So I'll just take that. I'll take that on for myself, right? It's hard to speak for the rest of the sort of rest of the industry, but look, I work my day job. I work for PBS, producing a show about about extreme weather, climate, and how it's changing and how we can prepare. Right. So it's very similar to Elemental, but multi-threat. It's we're talking about hurricanes, we're talking about floods, we're talking about sort of all of it. And it was extremely important to me that this documentary be as bulletproof in a fact check as anything else I've ever done. Everything that is said in our film is backed up and can be backed up by peer-reviewed scientific papers that have been published. That's really important to me because we are engaging in a space where there's a lot of contention around what we should do, to make ourselves safe as the climate warms, as fires become more destructive, right? And if we're going to be basing public policy that potentially risks or saves lives and homes, that in numbers that are going to be increasing in ways that I think we can't imagine at this point, we've got to be using the best available science. It's got to be peer reviewed, and people creating anything about this sort of work, how we're going to adapt to a warming, changing world. It's got to be as accurate as possible. So I brought basically the same rigor to this as I bring to something that would get past a PBS fact check. And yeah, I don't think that that's true about every climate change documentary. I mean, I got to say that I think that there's plenty of films that wouldn't pass a fact check. And even within that fact check, what you focus on, what you believe is the most important, and what you pitch as the most important can really change, even if everything is factually cited in a scientific paper. The emphasis, the time that you give to each idea, that can't be fact checked, right? And so yeah, I think we did our due diligence to make sure that our viewers could watch this piece, and I deeply believe that this is the way that the conversation around wildfire is going. Like, I think in 5 years, Elemental would be boring to watch because we will all know this. Everybody who's involved in wildfire would be like, oh yeah, that's the way it is. Because I think this is the way that we're going. And if you're, if you're focusing on the wrong things that sort of aren't real, and don't reflect reality, I don't think you're gonna ever get there, right? Like, you'll always be kind of pushing up against this wall that that will prevent this idea from spreading the way it needs to. So yeah, I think we have a huge responsibility
Yeah.
to be, to do our viewers justice and be respectful to our viewers, not only to allow them to make their own decisions with the information that we presented, but also focus on and weight our focus on different topics appropriately. And in this film, that was my aim. So
Yeah.
future will be the sort of verdict of how we did on that.
I'm glad you say that, because a lot of times I'll watch documentaries where it looks cooked, and even though I agree with the sentiment, I'm like, dude, you're not doing us any favors. Like, you don't got to lie about Trump to make him look like an a-hole. There's plenty of actual factual information that backs you up there.
Yeah, I completely agree. And like the thing that I will say as an argument like in favor of this film is that I went into it believing a different thing about fire and believing that we were going to tell a different story than we came out with. I went in thinking that we were going to focus almost exclusively on things like prescribed fire, on, we need to put more fire on the ground. That is the solution to this problem. And within 6 months of filming, I had a handful of people really change my understanding. And in fact, really the first big shoot, a researcher said to me, yeah, prescribed fire is good. We need that. It can be an ecological benefit to the forest. But whatever you do more than 100 feet from the home or the structure you want to protect from wildfire, outside of 100 feet, so like a very big yard, for example, farther away than that, it doesn't really have much effect on whether or not the home burns in a wildfire. And so I immediately thought, that guy's wrong. Like, that's definitely not, I don't understand that. I don't believe that. But if you watch the film, I mean, I literally spent 5 years convincing myself that he was right, just researching this idea. And so, I mean, I think that it's unusual in this day and age of really quick news. The pressure to get news and to get analysis out instantly means that we usually don't get to take the time to really deeply research an issue like this and believe and be able to say, with confidence, I believe it does encapsulate the issue very accurately. And so yeah, I mean, this is actually, it's actually very different than the film that I set out to create. And I, through the film, basically invite viewers into this journey with me.
So, actually, speaking of that, what was the journey? Just saying, like the behind the scenes stuff of,
Yeah.
got an idea of a movie I want to make, to the movie that you make, and as you say, the ideas change as you make it.
Yeah. So they're kind of like 3 points. The initial point was this fire happened outside of Portland, Oregon, 40, 50 miles east of Portland, and in a wilderness area. Very few homes, no homes were burned. Only really one structure was burned, and people were really losing their mind. People were freaking out. They were saying, "Oh, this area is destroyed." And I wanted to say, "Hey, look, this area has changed significantly, but it's not destroyed. It hadn't burned in almost 100 years, so this is a good thing." I wanted to talk about the benefits of wildfire and the benefits of prescribed fire. So I started working on this idea, and then I had this conversation I was referencing earlier, where someone said, "Look, if you want homes and communities not to burn down, you got to focus on the home, and within 100 feet of the home. So doing all this prescribed fire might be good for the forest, but it's not going to change the problem of homes burning." And that really confused me. So I started going on this path of like, okay, there's this lab in South Carolina, which you'll see in the film, where they build and burn down homes in a lab. In this big airplane hangar, they create realistic wildfire conditions, hurricane force winds. They build these homes, they burn them down, they figure out the weak points, right? So started researching this, and then the campfire happened. And you can see that was a pivotal moment, not only for me in understanding fire, but really for, I think, everybody who's paying attention to wildfire safety, right? 18,000 homes or structures were burned. 86 people died. It really changed. It was just suddenly everything became, how do we prevent this disaster from happening again? And that's what we started researching in the film. That's the question. That's a central question. How do we make sure there's never another paradise? And since then, there have been disasters that have been very close. Thankfully, not as large. But yeah. So those 3 points really, like, that was when they shaped my understanding of fire and of the questions that needed to be asked. And so, yeah, so the film is basically me, finding the smartest, the best researchers, the indigenous cultures, the firefighters who could answer those questions. How are we going to live and thrive in a hotter, drier West, a hotter, drier East as well? And I think we came out with an answer that is truthful. That I think we will all be like, oh, I'm glad that we made that change once we do.
What, this is probably a huge question, but why do you suppose humans are so self-destructive? Not just with climate change, but just in general. We'll go for anything that'll hurt us personally or as a society.
I mean,
we lean more on that
documentary
than
filmmaker. Yeah, this my answer might seem obvious based on my job, but I think stories. I think stories are why stories and narratives control the decisions that we make, right? And we learn those stories from the people around us, and the people around us have a specific set of experiences on which to base this reality, right? These stories that we create. And climate change presents a specific and difficult challenge for humans because we built cultures, we built entire societies during a very stable climate. 6,000, maybe 10,000 years of very stable climate. All of the narratives that we believe were created during that time. During that time, we went from a couple million people on Earth to billions of people, 7 billion people, right? 8 billion people. So it's not surprising that the narratives that we built during that time no longer are serving us during a time in which climate is changing faster than it ever has in our history, right? So we need to reframe, we need to reimagine, we need to relearn new stories. And that's what this film is about. This is about telling different stories about wildfire. And I think that's true about climate change in general, right? Like, I think we are telling stories that are no longer serving us. And we have to change those stories if we're going to survive.
Yeah. Well, I guess that'll segue into the last question. As far as stories that serve us, we have a "What's in the Box" segment. We like people to put kind of underseen movies in the box that we can watch lately. But I'll just kind of lean into that last comment. Like, what's a movie that you think is kind of important that shines light, not necessarily on wildfire or climate change, but just on something that you feel is really important, or maybe a narrative movie that would speak a similar truth.
I'm just gonna say one that I loved. It's sort of guilty pleasure, but I recently watched How to Blow Up a Pipeline.
Oh yeah, love that one.
And I just like, I mean, I don't think we can go around just blowing up pipelines, and that's not gonna like solve our problems. But boy, was it cathartic and fun to watch, right? Like, it was just like, oh man, I loved it. And again, like, whatever, we've got to sort of temper our expectations of change, right?
Yeah.
In some ways,
Actually,
but
also with the blow up how to blow up a pipeline, do you think, like, as extreme as that idea is, I mean, aren't we going to get to a point like, if we don't change things for the better, won't it end up like, won't that be the necessary conclusion at some point?
I think that it's a tough call.
Like, I don't want to gouge someone's eyes out, but if you're choking me at some point, your eyes are going to be gouged out. Like, I'll have nothing left. I'll have nothing left to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's honestly, I think, as like, look, I'm a white dude, middle class. I got a lot of privilege. My eyes are not being gouged out at this moment, by climate change. I'm probably going to be kind of okay. What I think that How to Blow Up a Pipeline did was it highlighted, it took characters with minimal story development, but powerful story development, and it showed the consequences of creating a situation in which people have no other options, and this extremely cathartic outcome, right? And I think that is maybe the most important sort of part of that, right? Is that we all should be grappling with, right? Like, there are plenty of people who currently have a bleeding neck wound, and that is their priority. Their priority is stopping the bleeding of that bleeding neck wound, right?
Yeah.
And so I think I think what's like, I would love to see a transition away from fossil fuels. I would love to see a transition that is a just transition that works for everyone. And honestly, I think part of that is using the best available science to build new structures that are going to serve us as the climate changes. To get off of fossil fuels, to quit cutting down so many trees, or at least for the wrong reasons. All of this stuff, right, that we do that makes climate change, that exacerbates climate change, right? I would like to see all of that happen in a way that we don't need to, that we don't create people or we don't create situations where people just don't have any other options, right? And feel that they have, that they've been left out, and the only option is to blow up a pipeline, right? I want us to live great, happy, fulfilled lives, and not have to do that sort of thing. So yeah, I hope we change the stories and the narratives before it gets to that point. And plenty of people right now would say, Trip, it's at that point. That's why that movie had such resonance with so many people. I saw it in a sold-out theater after it had been for a couple of weeks. Like, that movie's resonating with people. So I think that's why we need to get after it. Like, we need to be making the changes before we all feel that we have bleeding neck wounds, right?
Yeah. Well, that's the idea, but humans are self-destructive. What happened?
Where are we in that?
We're gonna have to go for the eyes.
Yeah. I mean,
but anyway, thanks for joining me, and hope everyone gets to watch Elemental.
Okay, I gotta say, I think that I want to invite people to watch this film because I really believe that there is great potential for us to change the outcome of all of these fires. We're not going to have less fires anytime soon. We are going to continue to see destruction from wildfires. And I think that we can continue to adapt to climate change in a way that works for us as a society, at least as far as wildfire. So I want to invite everyone to watch this film. It's streaming June 13th on Apple and Amazon. Check it out. Go to elementalfilm.com, and there's a link to the streaming. And we'd love to hear what you thought of it. So thank you so much for this time.